Ever since I became a gamer, I have always been drawn to single-player games. Whether that was due to growing up in the early 2000s before the rise of multiplayer monopolies like Halo and Call of Duty, and the rest is maybe just not having a whole lot of friends that shared the gaming hobby. I have always proudly considered myself a single player with benefits. And I'd like to talk about that today. My journey with gaming really started with hanging out with my father, let's call him Jeff Sr. He's a very casual gamer, but he had a Sega Genesis console, and every couple of weeks we would go down into town and rent a game from a locally owned video game rental spot. Now, this wasn't Blockbuster, it was just a mom and pop brick and mortar. It was whatever was local to us at the time. I was very young. I can't remember exactly what the store was called or really anything about it. It might not have even been a Sega Genesis. It could have been the Dreamcast. But I remember very vividly playing Pitfall: The Mayan Adventure. And I also remember that this 2D game was just so much fun because I was spending time with my father. And other times, we would be visiting my grandfather, my mom's dad, and he had a Nintendo GameCube. And there would be many times that we'd be over visiting and the adults were drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes in the kitchen, and I would be in the living room watching my older cousins play. Specifically, I remember one time my cousin Danny was playing through The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, and I recognized the level, the stage in which he was in. He was set in between the three. It was during the time in which you need to go get the Pearl of Nehru from Jabu. Yeah, not Jabu. That was Ocarina of Time, but from the large fish in Outset Island. And it's the Eternal Darkness. So you're fleeing from the Forsaken Fortress, and Ganon has made it to where the sun won't rise again. And he was stuck on Windfall Island. And other times, they were playing, maybe it was the first Metroid Prime on GameCube, which was my first-person shooter I'd ever seen. For me, watching my older cousins was just so cool, probably because they were older and they were the cool cousins, but also because it was very interesting. All I knew was that of the Sega Genesis and these 2D side-scroller graphics, and they had a miles better console than that out of the GameCube, and it had these three-dimensional graphics that looked more realistic compared to what I was used to. It was all mostly first or third person, so the immersion was up. And then my uncle, who, by the way, this uncle was the same man who introduced me to Star Wars for the first time, he also had an original Xbox, and I remember going through Star Wars Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Outcast on that console. And so these were the games that were out, and they were just super engrossing to me. And I should not forget Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb. I remember very vividly being stuck on the mission with the giant crocodile. There was this mystique of not being able to beat these games. So eventually, after some conversations with my parents, my grandfather convinced them to get me a console. Oh, well, just give the boy some candy or let him drink some pop. It was that same kind of a conversation. And before I knew it, I had a PlayStation 2 and a handful of games. I remember several of them. I don't remember in what order I got them, but I remember a few of the big highlights. Dragon Ball Z Budokai 1 through 3. In fact, the entire trilogy is just fantastic. I remember Tenkaichi 3. I remember Star Wars Bounty Hunter, and I remember Jak and Daxter, Jak 2 and Jak 3. I remember it all. Even Pitfall: The Lost Expedition, which is just a gem of a game. And it never made it past that generation, by the way. I mean, there was a re-release on Wii, but it never made it past that generation. It was a good time to be a gamer. I remember when all of my friends were transitioning on to the PlayStation 3 and 360, and I was still on my PlayStation 2 and my GameCube, which Grandpa had given me, and so I was playing through all of the Zelda games. Specifically, one of my favorite games I ever had, and I still have it, was The Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition on GameCube, which contained many of the first Zelda games. The original Legend of Zelda, which I still haven't beaten, the Legend of Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, which I still haven't beaten, but I did play to completion the Ocarina of Time, the Majora's Mask, several times ad nauseum, and on their own discs, The Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, all on GameCube, which I to this day will die on the hill that the GameCube version of Twilight Princess is superior because it's more accurate to the character of Link, traditionally being depicted as left-handed. And anytime I see the Wii or the Wii U version of Twilight Princess, I kind of get sick to my stomach a little bit because the game is actually mirrored because right-hand dominant players are more popular on the Wii platform. But I digress. I have been a gamer for over 25 years, and throughout all of that time I have had the opportunity to play multiplayer games. Whether it was couch co-op split screen with Star Wars Battlefront 2, a nice local couch co-op version of the game. I always preferred couch co-op and split screen because those are great times you can spend with friends, and I will forever prefer that to online gaming. But eventually, because you follow trends and that's what everyone else is doing, multiplayer gaming did become more popular. It was a way to socialize, so the Call of Duty lobbies from Modern Warfare 2 and then Black Ops, World at War, some of you weren't there and some of you wouldn't survive those lobbies. I understand, because I was there in the trenches. Halo 3, Halo 3 ODST multiplayer, Halo Reach lobbies were amazing, and you could just play games. I'm sure you got a little bit of heat in general, just a hot lobby every now and again, but it was part of it. Now, I have always returned to single-player games though. They are my preference, which you can probably certainly tell by the content of my channel. Single-player games offered me entertainment and safe fun in a world that was very quickly becoming unsafe for kids everywhere. Which is an interesting point also because this was around the time that I was diagnosed with some health issues that made any sort of hard contact sport very dangerous for me. So I ended up leaning into reading and movies and video games, while I might have pursued sports or advanced scout programs in another life. For a while I was playing games with movie tie-ins, so your Iron Man, your Lord of the Rings, light-hearted platformers like Jak and Daxter. That was, of course, until I tried my hands at Metal Gear Solid 3, Snake Eater. My original jump into Metal Gear was the prequel, but I didn't know that. My parents didn't know that. But imagine my surprise when I realized that this was actually very similar to another game I'd played several years prior, on one of those demo discs you used to be able to get. The Japanese dubbed but English subbed introduction of Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation 1. In that demo, you transitioned from the underground dock to the outer door to Shadow Moses Island. I played that demo on repeat for hours. Now, 8 years later, I'm playing the third game in the series, and I was hooked. Also, because I was first introduced to this mature form of storytelling, I had also recently been introduced to the Rambo franchise for the first time, so I had just seen First Blood Part 1 and 2 and Rambo 3. So this game about a soldier right around the same time really made an impression. I was able to relate John Rambo, specifically in First Blood Part 2, to Naked Snake during Operation Snake Eater. This led to a few games that were outside of my comfort zone for the first time. I mean, Final Fantasy VII, The Dirge of Cerberus, was my first Final Fantasy game and one of 2 Final Fantasy games that I've ever beaten. Shout out to you, Final Fantasy XII. I, at that point, was able to confirm what countless hours of The Legend of Zelda had already told me. These stories were as good as novels and films. As I went through elementary school and middle school, I eventually graduated to the PlayStation 3, where I was able to really enjoy some of the greats, like Fallout 3, and New Vegas after I had first experienced the Game of the Year edition of The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. Now, Oblivion for me was the passing of a torch. I'd experienced high caliber storytelling, but this was different. These were my choices. This wasn't Jak and Daxter going around finding precursor orbs and dealing with the precursors in general. If you've ever seen the ending of Jak 3, you know. This wasn't Naked Snake, or even Solid Snake, or even Raiden. It was me. The character I made, the character that I named, was making choices and discovering things in a very unique way to me. And I would talk with cousins who went through Oblivion very differently. My oldest cousin, we're going to call him Shuffle, was a very big wizard mage character fan. He made his own spells. He collected loads of items. He was the collector. My second oldest cousin, we're going to call him Plato, he was the Dark Brotherhood's biggest fan. Me, I just wanted to save the world first, then I'd go back and do the rest. And trust me, I did. The Xbox 360... When I got my first Xbox 360, I was transitioning from the 8th grade and into my freshman year of high school. This was also an era that I was very late to the party to, but was around the time of some of the really great releases for single-player and multiplayer titles. We had Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, we had War, we had Halo ODST and Reach, but let's also not forget Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots. Fallout 3 and New Vegas had also come out, and then in 2011, the big one, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. All these stories collected in my mind, and I began to see patterns in the writing, and I ended up being inspired to create stories of my own. Even taking a creative writing class elective in my junior year of high school, where I finished a rough draft of my first novel, something that I called The Island. Now, I wouldn't have been able to discover a love of storytelling without the games to see how the craft was handled. Then, being able to make my own virtually lived experiences, this allowed me to take a look, experience, and then sit back from that place of a storyteller and define my own plots. Now, for a long time, I sat in the Skyrim and New Vegas bubble. I know a ridiculous amount about those games. But this was really until I got into college and began studying animation and game design. It was my ambition to get a job with Bethesda Game Studios for a long time, well into my mid-20s, though I had also taken an interest in the works of another few great companies. Older cousin Shuffles, now you remember him from a little bit ago? He introduced me to BioWare late into my junior year of high school, but I never went through any of their games for completion until I was in college. The Mass Effect trilogy, Dragon Age Origins, and Inquisitions. Now, I never played 2, I know, but I played Knights of the Old Republic finally because I learned patience for turn-based strategy games. Knights of the Old Republic 2, while it was made by Obsidian, it was very inspired by BioWare's first outing. It showed me what you could do with world building on a level that in some ways surpasses Bethesda. Now, Bethesda's main characters have always been their worlds, but BioWare, they used to make plots you would love to find yourself in the middle of. I fall in love with Bethesda's worlds, but I fall in love with BioWare's stories and their casts of characters. Bethesda used to include a tagline on the back of many of their Elder Scrolls games, as far back as Morrowind I remember. Live another life. That is a slogan that deserves its own video, but I know that they have let me live those lives. Those lives are stories I still love to tell. I have plenty of stories about great kill cams or jokes from those multiplayer lobbies, but I have actual stories from my time in these single-player games. I remember where I was in my life when I finally defeated Ganon at the top of Hyrule in the Wind Waker. That was my first Zelda game. I remember where I was in life when I watched a soldier be used as a tool for the government during the Cold War. I remember where I was in my life when I first heard the phrase, War never changes. I'll never forget the promise my friend Martin Septim made to me at the end of our adventure, that when the next Elder Scroll was written, that I would be its scribe. I remember how it felt to defeat Alduin in Sovngarde and then return to the world I had saved. And then I just kept on living for hours upon hours. These are the moments that make me proud to say, yeah, I'm a single player with benefits. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you so much for this small little talk about my love for the game. Whether you're a fan of single player experiences or multiplayer experiences, why don't you let me know why that is down in the comments. If you liked the video, please smash that like button and subscribe and ring the notification bell to make sure that you never miss an episode. We've got a lot of content on the channel, and if anybody watched the State of Play on February 12th, you know that they announced the second half of the Metal Gear Master Collection. So, Metal Gear will be coming to the channel soon, and I'm very excited about that. I hope that everyone's having a great day, and as always, keep telling stories.